Deep beneath Vatican City, behind walls of reinforced steel and climate-controlled chambers of humanity, lies one's most guarded secrets. 50 miles of shelving stretched through corridors that few will ever see, housing documents that span over a millennium of human history. This is the Vatican Apostolic Archive, formerly known by a name that sent shivers through conspiracy theorists worldwide, the Vatican Secret Archive. But what if the greatest secret isn't what they're hiding, but what they've already found? For centuries, scholars have accepted that civilization began with the Sumerians around 5,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia. Clay tablets, cuneiform writing, the first cities, all emerging from the Fertile Crescent like humanity's first breath of consciousness. Yet whispers persist in academic circles, fragments of evidence that suggest something far more extraordinary. What if civilization didn't begin with Sumer? What if the Sumerians themselves inherited their knowledge from cultures lost to time, erased from history by cataclysm, and buried beneath layers of sediment and silence? Tonight, we're going to explore a possibility that challenges everything we think we know about human origins. We'll walk through the halls of power where popes have preserved humanity's most sensitive documents for over 1,000 years. We'll examine the evidence that suggests advanced civilizations flourished long before the first Sumerian city rose from the marshlands. And we'll ask the question that keeps archaeologists awake at night. If such civilizations existed, what proof might still survive, locked away in the world's most secretive archive? The story begins not with conspiracy, but with curiosity. In the basement levels of the Vatican Library, 3 floors beneath the marble halls where tourists snap photographs, lies a different world entirely. Here, the air hums with the quiet efficiency of climate control systems. Temperature and humidity gauges monitor conditions with scientific precision. The fluorescent lights reveal not mysterious chambers draped in shadow, but practical warehouses lined with acid-free boxes and fireproof filing cabinets. This is where history lives, cataloged and preserved with methods that would impress any modern archivist. The transformation of these archives from truly secret to merely private represents one of the most significant shifts in Vatican policy of the modern era. Until 1881, no outsider had ever set foot in these chambers. Papal documents traveled with each pope, locked in portable chests, their contents known only to a handful of trusted scribes. The very existence of certain records was itself classified information. But Pope Leo XIII, a man who understood that knowledge belongs to humanity, opened these doors to legitimate researchers for the first time in history. The access process remains rigorous, almost ritualistic in its formality. Scholars must present letters of recommendation from established institutions, specify their research focus with academic precision, and undergo interviews that test both their credentials and their intentions. Those who pass through the Porta di Sant'Anna, the side gate near St. Peter's Basilica, exchange their passports for temporary security passes. Swiss guards in their colorful uniforms wave them through checkpoints that protect not state secrets, but the fragile documents of centuries past. What researchers discover inside challenges their expectations. Instead of torchlit dungeons and hidden chambers, they find a thoroughly modern facility designed around a single principle: preservation. Documents rest in specially designed containers sorted by era and subject matter. Parchments with gold seals occupy their own climate-controlled section. The oldest papal registers, some dating back over 1,000 years, undergo careful digitization to ensure their survival for future generations. Every detail serves the mission of keeping these records intact for as long as human civilization endures. The sheer scope of the collection defies comprehension. 50 miles of shelving house, millions of individual documents. Papal correspondence with kings and emperors spans continents and centuries. diplomatic treaties that shaped the boundaries of nations rest alongside personal letters that reveal the human side of historical figures. The bill that Michelangelo submitted for painting the Sistine Chapel sits in the same archive as the excommunication decree that launched the Protestant Reformation. Each document represents a thread in the vast tapestry of human experience, preserved through wars, plagues, and the rise and fall of empires. But among these treasures of recorded history, some researchers believe lie documents of a different nature entirely. References to knowledge that predates the written record, fragments of information about civilizations that flourished before the first Sumerian scribe pressed stylus to clay. The Vatican's role as Christianity's central authority meant that for over a millennium, reports from missionaries, scholars, and travelers from every corner of the known world flowed into these archives. If evidence of pre-Sumerian civilizations existed anywhere, it would eventually find its way here. The possibility gains credence when we examine what mainstream archaeology has discovered about humanity's deep past. The timeline of civilization has been repeatedly pushed backward as new sites emerge from the earth. Structures once thought impossible for their supposed age now stand as monuments to human achievement, thousands of years older than previously imagined. The neat progression from hunter-gatherers to farmers to city builders has given way to a more complex story, one where sophisticated cultures appear suddenly in the archaeological record, fully formed and mysteriously advanced. Consider the Ubaidians, the mysterious people who inhabited Mesopotamia before the Sumerians arrived. These Proto-Euphradians, as scholars sometimes call them, left behind evidence of advanced irrigation systems, specialized crafts, and monumental architecture. The Sumerians themselves borrowed extensively from Ubaidian culture, adopting their words for farmer, priest, metalworker, and dozens of other occupations. The very foundation of Sumerian civilization rests on knowledge inherited from these earlier people. Yet the Ubaidians themselves remain largely anonymous to history. The timeline extends even further back when we examine sites like Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. This massive temple complex, carved from stone by hunter-gatherer societies 11,000 years ago, predates the Sumerian civilization by more than 6 millennia. The organizational requirements for such construction, involving hundreds of workers coordinating their efforts over decades, suggests social complexity that shouldn't have existed according to traditional archaeological models. Yet there it stands, weathered by time but undeniably real, challenging every assumption about when human societies developed the capacity for monumental architecture. The sophistication of Göbekli Tepe extends beyond mere construction. The site's builders understood astronomy, encoding celestial alignments into their stone circles. They mastered complex carving techniques, creating intricate reliefs of animals and symbols whose meanings remain mysterious. Most importantly, they possessed the social organization necessary to coordinate massive construction projects, suggesting hierarchical structures and specialized roles that archaeologists once believed impossible for pre-agricultural societies. These discoveries raise profound questions about the continuity of human knowledge. If sophisticated cultures existed in the deep past, what happened to their records, their libraries, their accumulated wisdom? Natural disasters, climate change, and the simple passage of time could have erased most physical evidence. But information has a way of surviving, passed down through oral traditions, encoded in myths, or preserved in the archives of institutions that span centuries. The Catholic Church, as one of humanity's oldest continuous institutions, would have been uniquely positioned to collect and preserve such information. Medieval monasteries served as repositories of classical knowledge during Europe's Dark Ages. Church scholars maintained contact with Islamic centers of learning, where ancient Greek and Roman texts survived. Missionary activities brought reports from distant lands, often including accounts of mysterious ruins, strange artifacts, and local traditions about vanished civilizations. Throughout the medieval period, church scholars encountered references to antediluvian civilizations, cultures that supposedly existed before the Great Flood described in biblical and Near Eastern texts. While many dismissed these as mythology, others collected and preserved such accounts, recognizing their potential historical value. The line between legend and history often blurred in medieval scholarship, but this very ambiguity may have led to the preservation of information that purely rational approaches might have discarded. The Renaissance brought renewed interest in classical antiquity and sparked expeditions to recover ancient knowledge. Church-sponsored expeditions often returned with more than religious artifacts. Archaeological finds from Egypt, Mesopotamia, and other ancient lands made their way into church collections. Scholars working under church patronage translated ancient texts, many of which contained references to civilizations older than recorded history. The Vatican's diplomatic network provided another channel for unusual discoveries. Papal nuncios, serving as ambassadors to kingdoms around the world, regularly reported on archaeological finds, ancient ruins, and local traditions about lost civilizations. These reports, filed away in the Vatican Archives, created a global database of anomalous discoveries that might otherwise have been forgotten by local authorities. The Jesuit order, renowned for their scholarly pursuits and global missions, played a particularly important role in this collection process. Jesuit missionaries in China encountered ancient texts describing civilizations of great antiquity. Their colleagues in the Americas documented sophisticated indigenous cultures with oral traditions stretching back thousands of years. These reports, written by educated observers trained in classical scholarship, would have been preserved in the order's extensive archives, many of which eventually made their way to the Vatican. As we trace these threads of evidence, a pattern emerges. The Vatican Archives represent more than a collection of church documents. They constitute a vast repository of human knowledge, accumulated over centuries through the Church's unique position as a global institution. If proof of pre-Sumerian civilizations exists anywhere, if evidence of humanity's forgotten past has survived the passage of millennia, the Vatican Archives would be its most likely resting place. The challenge lies not in the existence of such evidence, but in accessing it. The Vatican's 75-year rule means that many potentially relevant documents remain classified. Materials related to recent archaeological discoveries, modern scientific theories about human origins, and contemporary debates about civilization's timeline all fall within the restricted period. Even documents that are technically available require specific knowledge of their existence and location within the vast collection. The cataloging system itself presents obstacles to discovery. With millions of documents organized primarily by date and papal reign, finding references to pre-Sumerian civilizations requires knowing exactly where to look. A missionary's report about strange ruins in South America might be filed under diplomatic correspondence. A scholar's translation of an ancient text could rest in the records of a particular religious order. The very system designed to preserve these documents may also be hiding them in plain sight. Yet clues continue to emerge from the portions of the archive that have been open to researchers. References to antediluvian knowledge appear in medieval texts. Reports of anomalous archaeological discoveries surface in diplomatic correspondence. Scholarly debates about human origins, dating back centuries before Darwin, reveal that questions about civilization's true age have persisted far longer than most people realize. The implications extend beyond mere historical curiosity. If advanced civilizations existed before Sumer, if human knowledge extends back far deeper than we currently recognize, then our understanding of human potential itself requires revision. The rapid development of technology in recent centuries might not represent unprecedented progress, but the rediscovery of capabilities that humanity possessed in the distant past. Tomorrow, we'll delve deeper into the specific evidence that suggests such civilizations existed. We'll examine the archaeological discoveries that have shattered traditional timelines, the linguistic evidence that points to lost knowledge systems, and the geological proof of cataclysmic events that could have erased entire civilizations from the historical. The geological evidence alone should give us pause. Around 12,000 years ago, the Earth experienced what scientists call the Younger Dryas, a period of abrupt climate change that reshaped continents and drowned coastlines beneath rising seas. Ice cores from Greenland reveal spikes in platinum and other markers consistent with cosmic impact. Nanodiamonds and glass spherules appear in sediment layers across multiple continents, suggesting a global catastrophe of unprecedented scale. Sea levels rose more than 400 feet in what amounts to a geological instant. Entire continental shelves vanished beneath the waves, taking with them any evidence of coastal civilizations that might have flourished during the previous interglacial period. The Mediterranean basin filled. The English Channel carved its way between Britain and continental Europe. Vast regions of what is now the North Sea, the Persian Gulf, and the South China Sea transformed from habitable land into ocean floor. If advanced civilizations existed during the warmer periods before this cataclysm, their remains now lie beneath hundreds of feet of water and sediment. Only the highest elevations would have survived, and even these would have faced centuries of environmental chaos as the planet's climate system reorganized itself. Survivors would have been forced to rebuild from scattered fragments, carrying with them whatever knowledge they could preserve through oral tradition and portable artifacts. The pattern repeats throughout human history. Every 12,000 years or so, the Earth experiences similar upheavals. Magnetic reversals, impact events, massive volcanic episodes, sudden shifts in ocean currents that trigger ice ages or interglacial periods. Each cycle erases much of what came before, forcing humanity to begin again with only remnants of previous achievements. Yet knowledge has a way of surviving even the most complete disasters. The Hindu concept of yugas describes repeating cycles of rise and fall spanning vast periods of time. Mayan texts speak of multiple worlds, each destroyed and remade. Egyptian priests told Greek visitors about records of the first time, an epoch when gods walked among men and established the foundations of civilization. These aren't random mythologies, but parallel memories of the same recurring pattern. In the Vatican Archives, such mythological accounts would have been collected and preserved alongside more conventional historical documents. Medieval scholars made little distinction between legend and history, treating ancient texts as potential sources of factual information regardless of their miraculous content. A Jesuit missionary's report about indigenous flood myths would receive the same careful filing as a diplomatic treaty. An explorer's account of mysterious ruins would be preserved with the same diligence as a papal bull. This comprehensive approach to record-keeping means that the Vatican Archives likely contain references to lost civilizations scattered throughout thousands of unrelated documents, a passing mention in a letter from a Spanish conquistador, a footnote in a monk's translation of classical texts, a detailed report from a Renaissance scholar investigating ancient monuments. Each fragment might seem insignificant in isolation, but together they could form a coherent picture of humanity's forgotten past. The linguistic evidence provides another compelling thread. Sumerian, the world's first known written language, contains numerous words with no clear etymology within the Sumerian vocabulary itself. These borrowed terms often relate to advanced concepts like metallurgy, astronomy, mathematics, and monumental architecture. The implication is that the Sumerians inherited these concepts from an earlier culture, along with the specialized vocabulary needed to describe them. Similar patterns appear in other ancient languages. Egyptian hieroglyphs include symbols and concepts that seem to predate the unified Egyptian state. Sanskrit texts describe technologies and social structures that appear suddenly in the archaeological record without clear developmental precursors. Even Hebrew and Greek contain loan words that scholars trace to unknown source languages, possibly representing fragments of lost linguistic traditions. The Vatican's extensive collection of ancient and medieval texts would preserve many of these linguistic anomalies. Church scholars translated works from dozens of languages over the centuries, often noting unusual words or concepts that didn't fit conventional historical frameworks. Missionary reports frequently included glossaries of indigenous terms, some of which might preserve fragments of much older languages. The accumulated linguistic evidence scattered across centuries of documents could provide crucial clues about the vocabularies of vanished civilizations. Archaeological discoveries continue to push the boundaries of known history even further back in time. Sites like Gunung Padang in Indonesia, with its precisely fitted stone terraces, may date back over 20,000 years. The underwater structures off Japan's Yonaguni Island display architectural features that seem clearly artificial, yet they've been submerged since the last ice age. Similar anomalous sites appear on every continent, challenging conventional timelines and suggesting a much deeper history of human architectural achievement. The problem isn't a lack of evidence, but rather the interpretation of existing discoveries. Orthodox archaeology tends to explain away anomalous finds rather than revise established chronologies. Sophisticated stonework gets attributed to natural weathering patterns. Precisely aligned structures are dismissed as coincidental. Dating methods that produce inconvenient results are questioned, while those that support conventional timelines are accepted without scrutiny. This institutional resistance to paradigm shifts isn't unique to archaeology. Every scientific field experiences periods where established theories become so entrenched that contradictory evidence is systematically ignored or reinterpreted. The Catholic Church, despite its reputation for doctrinal rigidity, has often been more open to unconventional ideas than secular academic institutions. Church scholars were investigating geological timescales centuries before Darwin. Jesuit astronomers mapped the heavens, while university professors still taught geocentric models. The Vatican Archives would reflect this intellectual curiosity through centuries of collected observations, theories, and discoveries that mainstream institutions might have rejected. A medieval monk's speculation about the age of stone monuments. A Renaissance scholar's calculations about astronomical cycles, a Jesuit missionary's detailed measurements of ancient structures. These documents represent alternative streams of scientific inquiry that developed outside conventional academic channels. The preservation methods employed by the Vatican also mean that fragile documents that might have disintegrated elsewhere have survived in pristine condition. Papyrus fragments, silk scrolls, delicate parchments, all maintained in climate-controlled environments with constant monitoring. Materials that would have crumbled to dust in most archives remain readable after centuries of storage. The potential for unexpected discoveries increases dramatically when preservation conditions approach laboratory standards. Modern technology has begun to reveal hidden layers of information, even in documents that scholars thought they understood completely. Multispectral imaging can detect erased text beneath visible writing. Chemical analysis identifies inks and pigments that provide clues about age and origin. Digital enhancement reveals faded passages that haven't been legible for centuries. As these techniques are applied to Vatican documents, previously unknown content continues to emerge from familiar sources. The digitization process itself has accelerated the pace of discovery. Documents that once required physical visits to examine can now be studied by researchers worldwide. Pattern recognition software can identify related passages across thousands of separate texts. Translation algorithms can process languages that lack sufficient human experts. The same technological revolution that has transformed other fields of research is beginning to unlock secrets that have remained hidden in plain sight for centuries. Cross-referencing capabilities reveal connections that individual researchers might never have noticed. A name mentioned in a 14th century papal letter appears in a 16th century missionary report. An unusual term in one document matches references in texts separated by centuries and continents. These connections, invisible to earlier generations of scholars working with physical documents, become apparent when entire collections can be searched and analyzed simultaneously. The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity. If advanced civilizations did exist before recorded history, their knowledge might include solutions to problems that contemporary society faces. Sustainable agriculture techniques developed over millennia, architectural methods that withstand seismic activity, social organizations that maintain stability across centuries. The practical applications of rediscovered knowledge could prove as valuable as the historical insights. Environmental management provides one particularly relevant example. Ancient cultures often developed sophisticated understanding of local ecosystems through centuries of careful observation. Agricultural techniques that maintained soil fertility across generations, water management systems that functioned for thousands of years, forest management practices that preserve biodiversity while supporting human populations. This accumulated wisdom, if it could be recovered and understood, might offer alternatives to the environmental challenges that industrial civilization has created. The Vatican's global network of missions and monasteries created unprecedented opportunities for observing and recording such traditional knowledge systems. Missionaries didn't just spread religious doctrine, they documented the cultures they encountered in remarkable detail. Agricultural practices, social customs, technological innovations, oral histories, all found their way into reports that eventually reached Vatican Archives. The accumulated observations represent a global database of human cultural achievement, spanning centuries of contact between European Christianity and indigenous societies worldwide. Medical knowledge provides another area where ancient wisdom might complement modern understanding. Traditional healing systems often incorporate insights developed over thousands of years of empirical observation. Plant medicines whose effectiveness has been validated by modern pharmacology. Diagnostic techniques that identify conditions Western medicine struggles to recognize. Therapeutic approaches that address root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. The Vatican's extensive records of missionary encounters with traditional healing systems could preserve knowledge that mainstream medicine has overlooked or dismissed. Astronomical observations offer yet another domain where ancient knowledge might surprise contemporary researchers. Pre-telescopic astronomers achieved remarkable precision through patient observation over extended periods. They tracked planetary cycles, predicted eclipses, and identified stellar patterns that modern astronomy has only recently begun to understand. Their calculations, preserved in various forms across different cultures, might contain insights that complement our current understanding of celestial mechanics. As we examine these possibilities, the Vatican Archives emerge not just as a repository of Christian history, but as humanity's most comprehensive collection of alternative knowledge systems. The Church's role as a global institution meant that information flowed into these archives from every inhabited continent. The institution's longevity ensured that documents were preserved across centuries of political upheaval. The scholarly traditions of monastic communities guaranteed that unusual or anomalous information received the same careful attention as conventional historical records. The question isn't whether such knowledge exists within the Vatican Archives, but rather how much of it remains unrecognized by researchers who approach the collection with conventional expectations. A document filed under diplomatic correspondence might contain crucial archaeological observations. A theological treatise might preserve ancient scientific knowledge. A missionary's personal journal might record technological innovations that predate their supposed invention by centuries. The 75-year classification rule means that many potentially relevant documents remain inaccessible to outside researchers. Modern archaeological discoveries, contemporary debates about human origins, recent scientific theories about ancient civilizations all fall within the restricted time frame. The Vatican's own scholars undoubtedly have access to these materials, but their findings rarely reach public attention unless they support conventional historical narratives. This institutional caution reflects legitimate concerns about preserving both the documents themselves and the Church's reputation for scholarly rigor. Premature release of controversial material could damage the Vatican's credibility as a keeper of historical records. Similarly, allowing unrestricted access might result in damage to irreplaceable documents or misinterpretation of complex historical evidence. Yet the tension between preservation and accessibility continues to generate speculation about what secrets might remain hidden within the archives. Each partial disclosure reveals tantalizing glimpses of the collection's scope while raising new questions about materials that remain classified. The more researchers discover about the extent and sophistication of pre-Sumerian cultures, the more urgent becomes the question of whether complete documentation of such civilizations might exist somewhere within 50 miles of Vatican shelving. The challenge of accessing these potential treasures isn't merely bureaucratic. The sheer magnitude of the collection creates a labyrinth where crucial discoveries might rest unnoticed for centuries. Researchers describe catalogs written entirely in Latin or medieval Italian, handwritten in scripts that require specialized training to decipher. The filing system, developed over centuries by different papal administrations, follows organizational principles that made sense to their creators but often confuse modern scholars. A single afternoon in the reading rooms might yield only a handful of documents from the thousands that could potentially contain relevant information. Photography is prohibited, forcing researchers to transcribe everything by hand or laptop, a process that limits how much material can be examined during brief visits. Many scholars arrive with specific document requests, only to discover that the materials they've traveled continents to examine contain nothing relevant to their research. Yet occasionally, serendipity intervenes. A scholar researching medieval trade routes stumbles across references to ancient stone circles. An expert on papal diplomacy encounters descriptions of mysterious ruins encountered by early missionaries. A linguist studying ecclesiastical Latin discovers loan words that seem to derive from unknown languages. These accidental discoveries often prove more valuable than targeted research, suggesting that the archives contain far more anomalous material than their catalogs indicate. The Vatican's relationship with archaeological discovery has evolved dramatically over the centuries. During the Renaissance, papal patronage supported expeditions that recovered classical antiquities from across the Mediterranean world. The Vatican museums grew from these collecting efforts, housing artifacts that revealed the sophistication of ancient cultures. But alongside the celebrated marble statues and golden treasures, these expeditions also returned with less spectacular finds that nonetheless documented the unexpected antiquity of human achievement. Papal nuncios serving in distant lands regularly forwarded reports of unusual discoveries to Rome. Stone structures that predated local historical traditions. Artifacts displaying technological sophistication that seemed inconsistent with their supposed age. Oral histories that described civilizations flourishing thousands of years before written records began. These reports, filed away according to the administrative logic of their time, created an inadvertent database of anomalous archaeological information. The Jesuit Order's global educational network provided another stream of unusual observations. Jesuit scholars in China encountered texts describing astronomical observations spanning thousands of years. Their colleagues in India studied Sanskrit manuscripts that detailed mathematical concepts centuries ahead of their supposed discovery. Missions in the Americas documented architectural achievements that challenged European assumptions about indigenous capabilities. Each report added another piece to a puzzle that mainstream archaeology was not yet ready to assemble. The preservation of such materials reflects the Church's unique institutional memory. While secular governments rose and fell, destroying or dispersing their archives in the process, the Vatican maintained continuity across political upheavals that shattered other record-keeping institutions. Documents that might have been lost when empires collapsed found safe haven in the papal collections, where they remained accessible to scholars who understood their potential significance. This continuity becomes especially important when examining evidence for cyclical destruction and rebuilding of human civilization. The geological record clearly shows repeated episodes of catastrophic climate change that would have devastated coastal populations and disrupted agricultural societies. Yet traditional archaeology struggles to account for how sophisticated cultures could emerge so rapidly in the aftermath of such disasters. The answer might lie in the survival of knowledge through institutions capable of maintaining information across dark ages and recovery periods. The Vatican represents the most successful example of such an institution in Western civilization, but similar organizations existed in other cultures. Buddhist monasteries preserve knowledge across political collapses in Asia. Islamic schools maintained classical learning during European upheavals. Indigenous traditions transmitted technical and astronomical knowledge through oral instruction across centuries. If representatives of these various knowledge-keeping traditions maintained contact with Vatican scholars, their combined archives might preserve a more complete picture of human achievement than any single institutional collection. Trade networks, diplomatic missions, and scholarly exchanges created opportunities for information transfer that transcended political and religious boundaries. The Vatican Archives could thus contain not only direct European observations of anomalous discoveries, but also secondhand reports of similar findings from across the inhabited world. The linguistic evidence embedded within these collections provides another avenue for recognizing the antiquity of human knowledge. Ancient languages often contain technical vocabularies that imply sophisticated understanding of subjects supposedly discovered much later. Sumerian cuneiform includes precise terms for astronomical phenomena that require centuries of careful observation to recognize. Egyptian hieroglyphs describe engineering concepts that suggest practical experience with large-scale construction projects. These specialized vocabularies didn't develop overnight. They represent the accumulated knowledge of generations of practitioners who refine their understanding through trial and error over extended periods. The sudden appearance of such technical language in the earliest written records implies that the knowledge itself predates the writing systems that first recorded it. Church scholars translating ancient texts would have encountered many such linguistic anomalies. Technical terms with no clear etymology within known language families. Concepts that seem to require mathematical or scientific knowledge beyond what historical timelines suggested was possible. Astronomical references that implied observation periods longer than recorded history allowed. These puzzling elements would have been noted and preserved even when their significance wasn't understood. The accumulation of such observations across centuries of scholarly work could reveal patterns invisible to individual researchers working with limited materials. A Jesuit's notes about unusual Sanskrit terms might connect with a Dominican's observations about Egyptian inscriptions. A papal scholar's questions about astronomical references in ancient texts might find answers in a missionary's report about indigenous calendrical systems. The Vatican's role as a central repository for global Catholic scholarship created unique opportunities for such connections to emerge. Modern computational analysis of Vatican documents could accelerate this pattern recognition process dramatically. Machine learning algorithms trained to identify linguistic anomalies could process texts that would take human researchers decades to examine thoroughly. Translation software could help scholars working in one ancient language recognize connections with materials written in scripts they cannot read personally. Digital humanities approaches could reveal relationships between documents separated by centuries and continents. The theological implications of discovering advanced pre-biblical civilizations might initially seem problematic for church doctrine. But Catholic intellectual tradition has generally embraced scientific discovery rather than rejecting it. The Church officially accepts evolutionary theory, geological timescales, and astronomical models that place human existence within a cosmic context spanning billions of years. Extending human cultural achievement backward by several millennia would require doctrinal adjustment rather than fundamental revision. Indeed, Catholic theology already incorporates concepts that could accommodate evidence of ancient advanced civilizations. The notion of natural revelation suggests that humans discover truths about the physical reason can world independently of scriptural revelation. The concept of progressive revelation allows for the possibility that divine truth was revealed gradually across human history rather than all at once. These frameworks provide theological space for recognizing human achievements that predate biblical chronology. The practical implications of recovering ancient knowledge extend far beyond academic satisfaction. Contemporary civilization faces challenges that earlier cultures might have solved through different approaches to technology and social organization. Climate adaptation strategies developed by societies that survived previous warming and cooling cycles. Agricultural techniques that maintain productivity across centuries without depleting soil resources. Urban planning concepts that created stable communities lasting for millennia. Environmental management provides perhaps the most urgent area where ancient wisdom might inform contemporary decisions. Archaeological evidence reveals that many past civilizations developed sustainable relationships with their local ecosystems before ultimately succumbing to external disasters rather than internal collapse. The techniques they used to maintain ecological balance while supporting substantial populations could offer alternatives to the resource-intensive approaches that characterize modern industrial society. Water management systems provide specific examples of ancient engineering that surpassed later achievements in both efficiency and durability. The Qanat irrigation networks of ancient Persia transported water across hundreds of miles, using gravity-fed underground channels that continued functioning for thousands of years. Roman aqueducts supplied cities with clean water using engineering principles that weren't fully understood again until the modern era. Mayan reservoirs captured and stored rainwater through sophisticated filtration systems that kept water potable across extended dry seasons. These achievements required not just individual brilliance, but institutional knowledge that accumulated across generations of practitioners. The techniques were refined through centuries of experimentation and passed down through apprenticeship systems that preserved both theoretical understanding and practical skills. The sudden collapse of these knowledge traditions during periods of social upheaval represents one of humanity's greatest recurring losses. The Vatican Archives might preserve documentation of such technical knowledge through the reports of missionaries and scholars who observed these systems while they still functioned. Detailed descriptions of engineering techniques, measurements of construction methods, even drawings of mechanical devices could exist within documents filed under theological or administrative headings. The information might be scattered across multiple sources and require careful reconstruction, but the basic documentation could provide starting points for understanding how these systems worked. Medical knowledge represents another domain where ancient insights might complement modern understanding. Traditional healing systems often incorporate observations about human physiology and pharmacology that were developed through millennia of empirical testing. The effectiveness of many traditional remedies has been validated by modern research, suggesting that ancient healers possessed sophisticated understanding of biochemistry and anatomy. The Vatican's global missionary network would have encountered traditional medical systems on every inhabited continent. Missionary reports often included detailed descriptions of indigenous healing practices, both to understand local customs and to identify techniques that might benefit European populations. These observations, preserved in Vatican archives, could document medical knowledge that has since been lost as traditional societies were disrupted by modernization. Astronomical knowledge provides yet another area where ancient achievements might exceed modern expectations. Pre-telescopic astronomers achieved remarkable precision through patient observation across extended time periods. They tracked planetary motions, predicted eclipses, and identified stellar patterns that modern astronomy has only recently begun to understand fully. Their calculations, preserved in various forms across different cultures, demonstrate mathematical sophistication that challenges assumptions about the development of scientific thinking. The Vatican's collection of astronomical texts spans centuries of observation by scholars working within the Church's educational institutions. Medieval monasteries maintained astronomical equipment and trained observers who tracked celestial events as part of their religious duties. Renaissance papal courts patronized astronomers whose work contributed to the scientific revolution. These accumulated observations, combined with reports from missionaries about indigenous astronomical traditions, could preserve knowledge of celestial mechanics that predates modern theoretical frameworks. The integration of such diverse knowledge systems presents both opportunities and challenges for contemporary scholarship. Ancient techniques that proved effective across centuries of use might offer solutions to modern problems, but adapting them to current contexts requires careful study of the social and environmental conditions that made them successful. Similarly, astronomical or mathematical insights from ancient sources might complement modern understanding, but only if they can be translated into frameworks that contemporary scientists can evaluate and test. The Vatican's role as both preserver and interpreter of ancient knowledge positions the institution uniquely to facilitate such integration. Church scholars have maintained continuous traditions of engagement with classical learning while also developing expertise in modern scientific methods. The Vatican Observatory conducts cutting-edge astronomical research while maintaining connections to historical observations spanning centuries. Vatican archaeologists work on sites across the Mediterranean world using both traditional scholarship and advanced technological methods. This combination of historical continuity and scientific innovation could prove crucial for recognizing and understanding evidence of ancient advanced civilizations. Documents that might seem merely curious to historians could reveal their full significance when examined by researchers familiar with both ancient knowledge systems and modern scientific capabilities. The Vatican's scholarly resources could provide the interdisciplinary expertise needed to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding. The question of disclosure remains complex. Even if Vatican scholars have identified evidence of advanced pre-Sumerian civilizations within their archives, the implications of such discoveries would require careful consideration before public release. The potential impact on established historical narratives, educational curricula, and public understanding of human development could be enormous. Responsible scholarship requires thorough verification and peer review before making claims that would fundamentally alter our understanding of the past. Yet the potential benefits of such knowledge might outweigh the risks of continued secrecy. If ancient civilizations develop solutions to challenges that contemporary society faces, delaying access to that information could prove more harmful than the disruption caused by revising historical timelines. The urgency of environmental and social problems might justify accelerating the disclosure process, even at the cost of some scholarly uncertainty about specific details. The balance between caution and transparency reflects broader tensions within academic and religious institutions about their responsibilities to both preserve knowledge and share it appropriately. The Vatican's experience as keeper of sensitive historical information provides a model for how other institutions might approach similar dilemmas. The gradual opening of previously classified materials allows for controlled evaluation of controversial evidence, while maintaining institutional credibility and protecting fragile documents from damage or misinterpretation. As we approach the threshold of potentially revolutionary discoveries about humanity's deep past, the Vatican Archives emerge as more than a repository of religious documents. They represent humanity's most comprehensive attempt to preserve knowledge across the cycles of destruction and renewal that have shaped our species' journey through time. Whether they contain definitive proof of pre-Sumerian civilizations remains to be seen, but the possibility alone should inspire us to look more carefully at the evidence that surrounds us, waiting to be recognized and understood. The search for humanity's forgotten past continues in laboratories and libraries, in excavation sites and archive reading rooms. Each discovery brings us closer to understanding the full scope of human achievement and the recurring patterns that have shaped our development across millennia. The Vatican Archives, with their unique combination of global scope, institutional continuity, and scholarly expertise, may hold keys that could unlock the next chapter in humanity's understanding of its own extraordinary story. The evidence emerges slowly, like sediment layers revealing their secrets to patient archaeologists. In reading rooms where scholars bend over documents centuries old, connections begin to surface between seemingly unrelated texts. A papal legate's report from medieval Armenia mentions stone circles aligned to celestial events. A Jesuit missionary's journal from 16th century Peru describes indigenous traditions of builders who possessed knowledge of the stars. A Dominican friar's translation of an Arabic manuscript references antediluvian civilizations whose wisdom survived the Great Deluge through hidden repositories of learning. These fragments, scattered across different centuries and continents, paint a picture that conventional archaeology has yet to acknowledge. The builders of the ancient world possessed understanding that extended far beyond what Bronze Age societies should have achieved. Their knowledge encompassed not just practical skills like metalworking and agriculture, but sophisticated comprehension of mathematical principles, astronomical cycles, and engineering techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered for millennia. The consistency of these reports troubles mainstream scholars who encounter them. How could isolated cultures across different continents develop identical solutions to complex problems? Why do ancient texts from Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and Central America describe similar technological achievements and social structures? The standard explanation involves parallel evolution, independent discovery of the same principles by separate societies. Yet the details often match too precisely for coincidence, suggesting instead a common source of knowledge that predated the civilizations that recorded it. Linguistic analysis provides additional clues about this shared inheritance. Ancient languages contain technical vocabularies that imply centuries of development, yet these specialized terms appear suddenly in the earliest written records. Sumerian cuneiform includes precise astronomical terminology that requires generations of careful observation to develop. Egyptian hieroglyphs describe engineering concepts that suggest practical experience with massive construction projects. Sanskrit texts employ mathematical language that indicates sophisticated understanding of geometry and calculation. The implications become more startling when researchers trace the etymologies of these technical terms. Many appear to derive from unknown source languages, possibly representing fragments of much older linguistic traditions. The vocabulary of metallurgy, astronomy, architecture, and mathematics seems to have been borrowed wholesale from cultures that left no other traces in the historical record. These phantom civilizations, known only through the specialized knowledge they bequeathed, challenge every assumption about the linear development of human culture. Church scholars encountering such linguistic anomalies would have noted and preserved them even when their significance remained unclear. Medieval translators working with classical texts regularly encountered words and concepts that didn't fit conventional historical frameworks. Renaissance scholars studying newly discovered manuscripts found references to technologies and social structures that seemed impossibly advanced for their supposed periods. These observations, carefully recorded and filed away, created an inadvertent database of evidence for lost civilizations. The Vatican's unique position as recipient of reports from across the Christian world meant that similar anomalies surfaced repeatedly in different contexts. A missionary's description of ancient ruins in one location might echo an explorer's account of mysterious structures thousands of miles away. Linguistic puzzles identified by scholars working with Near Eastern texts could find parallels in reports about indigenous languages from the Americas. The accumulation of such parallel observations across different sources strengthened the case for common origins. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to validate these historical hints about humanity's deeper past. Sites like Poverty Point in Louisiana, with its precisely engineered earthworks dating back over 3,000 years, demonstrate sophisticated understanding of geometry and astronomy among supposedly primitive cultures. The Nazca lines in Peru require aerial perspective to appreciate fully, yet they were created by societies that allegedly lacked flight technology. Megalithic structures across Europe, Africa, and Asia employ construction techniques that modern engineers struggle to replicate. Each new discovery pushes the timeline of human achievement further backward. The massive stone spheres of Costa Rica, perfectly round and precisely placed across jungle landscapes, represent technological capabilities that don't appear elsewhere in the archaeological record of their supposed period. The underground cities of Cappadocia in Turkey, carved from solid rock with ventilation systems and water management networks, required planning and execution skills that seem inconsistent with their attributed age. The problem isn't isolated anomalies that might be explained away through natural processes or dating errors. Instead, we face a consistent pattern of sophisticated achievements appearing suddenly in the archaeological record without clear developmental precursors. The techniques seem to emerge fully formed, as though inherited from earlier traditions, rather than developed through gradual experimentation. This pattern becomes even more pronounced when examining the astronomical knowledge embedded in ancient structures. The builders of Stonehenge understood celestial mechanics well enough to predict eclipses centuries in advance. Mayan astronomers calculated planetary cycles with precision that matches modern observations. The designers of Angkor Wat encoded the precession of the equinoxes into their temple complex, demonstrating awareness of astronomical phenomena that require millennia of careful observation to recognize. Such knowledge couldn't have developed in isolation. Astronomical observation requires institutional continuity across generations, with trained observers maintaining records and refining calculations over extended periods. The sudden appearance of sophisticated astronomical knowledge in the archaeological record implies the existence of educational institutions and scholarly traditions that predate the civilizations usually credited with such achievements. The Vatican Archives would have preserved documentation of these knowledge traditions through the reports of missionaries and scholars who encountered them while they still functioned. Medieval European visitors to Constantinople described libraries containing astronomical texts that claimed origins in antediluvian times. Renaissance explorers in the Americas documented indigenous traditions of skywatching that incorporated observations spanning thousands of years. Islamic scholars working in medieval Spain translated texts that attributed advanced mathematical knowledge to ancient sources. These accounts, preserved in Vatican collections alongside more conventional historical documents, provide glimpses into knowledge systems that mainstream archaeology has yet to acknowledge. The astronomical traditions of ancient cultures often claimed inheritance from earlier masters, who established the foundational observations upon which later calculations were based. The mathematical principles underlying architecture and engineering were frequently attributed to divine or semi-divine teachers who appeared in the distant past to instruct humanity in the arts of civilization. Such attributions might represent more than mythological embellishment. The consistency of these traditions across different cultures suggests shared memory of actual historical figures or institutions that preserved and transmitted advanced knowledge. The teachers described in these accounts possessed understanding that exceeded the apparent capabilities of the societies they instructed, implying that they represented surviving fragments of more sophisticated cultures. The cyclic nature of civilization becomes apparent when examining the geological and climatic context of human development. The Earth experiences regular episodes of catastrophic change that would devastate coastal populations and disrupt agricultural societies. Ice ages and interglacial periods alternate according to astronomical cycles that span tens of thousands of years. Supervolcanic eruptions create global winter conditions that can persist for decades. Cosmic impacts trigger mass extinctions and climate reversals that reshape entire continents. Human civilization has developed during a remarkably stable climatic period that began roughly 12,000 years ago. Prior to that, the planet experienced violent fluctuations in temperature, sea level, and atmospheric composition that would have made complex societies difficult to maintain. Yet growing evidence suggests that sophisticated cultures did exist during earlier periods, only to be erased by natural disasters that left few traces for later archaeologists to discover. The survivors of such catastrophes would have faced the challenge of rebuilding from scattered remnants while preserving whatever knowledge they could salvage from their destroyed civilizations. The most durable information would have been that which could be transmitted through oral tradition or encoded in structures resistant to natural disasters. Stone monuments aligned to astronomical events could preserve calendrical knowledge across dark ages. Mathematical principles could be embedded in architectural proportions that would survive even when the original builder's intentions were forgotten. This perspective explains the seemingly impossible sophistication of humanity's earliest monuments. Rather than representing the first tentative steps toward civilization, structures like the Great Pyramid and Stonehenge might be reconstructions of much older designs, built by survivors who retained fragments of antediluvian knowledge. The precision and astronomical alignment of these monuments reflect not primitive ignorance gradually giving way to learning, but inherited wisdom being reapplied in new circumstances. The Vatican's role as preserver of knowledge across political upheavals and social collapses provides a model for how information might survive civilizational disasters. Monastic communities maintained classical learning through the European Dark Ages, preserving texts and traditions that would otherwise have been lost. Similar institutions existed in other cultures, creating networks of knowledge preservation that transcended political boundaries and survived dynastic changes. If representatives of these knowledge-keeping traditions maintained contact across cultural and religious boundaries, their combined archives might preserve more complete records of human achievement than any single collection. The Vatican's global diplomatic network created opportunities for such exchanges, with papal nuncios and missionary orders serving as conduits for information transfer between distant scholarly communities. The linguistic evidence for such exchanges appears in the loanwords and technical vocabularies that ancient languages borrowed from unknown sources. These phantom languages, known only through the specialized knowledge they contributed to later cultures, might represent fragments of global lingua francas that facilitated communication between scholarly institutions across vast distances. The sudden appearance of sophisticated technical vocabularies in multiple ancient languages could reflect the dissemination of preserved knowledge from these earlier educational networks. Modern computational analysis of Vatican documents could reveal patterns of such knowledge transfer that individual researchers might never recognize. Machine learning algorithms trained to identify linguistic relationships could trace the spread of technical terms across different manuscript traditions. Digital humanities approaches could map the geographic and temporal distribution of similar concepts appearing in texts from different cultures and time periods. The theological framework that governs Vatican scholarship could accommodate evidence of ancient advanced civilizations more easily than secular academic institutions might expect. Catholic intellectual tradition has generally embraced scientific discovery rather than rejecting it when evidence conflicts with conventional understanding. The Church's acceptance of evolutionary theory, geological timescales, and cosmological models demonstrates institutional flexibility in adapting doctrine to accommodate new knowledge about the natural world. Indeed, certain aspects of Catholic teaching might be better served by acknowledging humanity's deeper history than by maintaining conventional chronologies that compress human cultural development into an implausibly brief time frame. The concept of natural law suggests that human reason can discover truths about the physical world independently of revelation. The notion of progressive revelation allows for the possibility that divine truth has been revealed gradually across human history rather than all at once. These theological frameworks provide space for recognizing human achievements that extend far beyond biblical chronology without requiring fundamental revision of core doctrines. If ancient civilizations developed sophisticated understanding of natural phenomena through careful observation and reasoning, their discoveries could be viewed as examples of natural revelation operating across extended time periods. The practical implications of recovering such ancient knowledge extend into virtually every domain of human activity. Agricultural techniques that maintain soil fertility across millennia might offer alternatives to industrial farming methods that deplete natural resources. Water management systems that functioned reliably for thousands of years could inform contemporary approaches to drought mitigation and flood control. Urban planning concepts that created stable communities might provide models for sustainable development in an era of rapid population growth. Medical traditions that developed through thousands of years of empirical observation could complement modern pharmaceutical approaches, with insights about human physiology and biochemistry. Architectural principles that enabled structures to survive earthquakes and weather extremes for millennia might inform building codes in regions subject to natural disasters. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge preserved in ancient texts could contribute to contemporary scientific understanding in unexpected ways. The recovery of such knowledge requires not just access to ancient documents, but also the interdisciplinary expertise needed to recognize and interpret evidence that spans multiple fields of study. Vatican scholars, with their training in classical languages, historical methodology, and theological analysis, might be uniquely positioned to identify significant passages that specialists in narrower fields might overlook. The institution's long tradition of supporting scientific research alongside religious studies provides the intellectual framework needed to evaluate ancient knowledge claims using both historical and scientific criteria. The question of whether such revolutionary evidence exists within the Vatican Archives may ultimately be less important than the broader implications of humanity's expanding understanding of its own past. Each new archaeological discovery, each reanalysis of ancient texts, each application of advanced dating techniques to existing artifacts continues to reveal the sophistication of our ancestors and the depth of human achievement across time. The pattern that emerges from this accumulating evidence suggests that human civilization has experienced multiple cycles of rise, achievement, decline, and renewal across far longer time periods than conventional history acknowledges. The knowledge developed during earlier cycles didn't vanish completely, but survived in fragments that were incorporated into later cultural traditions. The Vatican Archives, as humanity's most comprehensive repository of such traditional knowledge, may indeed contain crucial pieces of this larger puzzle. Whether that evidence takes the form of explicit accounts of pre-Sumerian civilizations or subtle indications embedded within conventional historical documents, the archives represent our best hope for recovering humanity's forgotten achievements. The patient work of scholars examining these documents line by line, cross-referencing obscure passages with archaeological discoveries, and applying new analytical techniques to ancient texts continues to yield surprising insights about the complexity and antiquity of human culture. The transformation of our understanding may come not through dramatic revelations, but through the gradual accumulation of evidence that shifts the balance of scholarly opinion. Each fragment of linguistic evidence, each anomalous archaeological discovery, each reanalysis of existing texts contributes to a growing recognition that human civilization extends much past than previously imagined. The Vatican, deeper into the archives, with their unparalleled scope and careful preservation, may ultimately provide the documentation needed to complete this revolutionary revision of human history. As we stand at the threshold of potentially transformative discoveries about our species' past, the importance of institutions like the Vatican Archives becomes increasingly apparent. Their role extends beyond preserving religious documents to maintaining humanity's collective memory across the cycles of achievement and loss that have shaped our journey through time. In their climate-controlled chambers, among millions of carefully cataloged documents, may lie the keys to understanding not just where we came from, but what we might become when we fully grasp the extraordinary scope of human potential across the ages. The intersection of ancient memory and modern discovery reveals itself most clearly in the patterns that emerge when seemingly disparate evidence converges. Deep within the Vatican's manuscript collections, scattered references to antediluvian knowledge begin to form coherent pictures when examined alongside contemporary archaeological findings. A 14th century translation of an Arabic text mentions stone circles that tracked celestial movements across vast cycles of time. A 16th century missionary report from the Andes describes indigenous traditions of master builders who understood the language of the stars. A medieval monk's commentary on classical sources references libraries of the first time that preserved wisdom from before the Great Catastrophe. These fragments, preserved through the Church's institutional memory, gain new significance as modern research validates their seemingly impossible claims. The precision required to encode astronomical cycles spanning thousands of years into stone monuments couldn't have developed through casual observation. Such knowledge demands institutional continuity across generations, with trained observers maintaining records and refining calculations over extended periods. The builders of these ancient complexes possessed understanding that required centuries to develop, yet their achievements appear suddenly in the archaeological record without clear developmental precursors. The mathematics embedded within these structures reveals another layer of inherited sophistication. Sacred geometry appears consistently across cultures separated by oceans and millennia, suggesting common sources of knowledge rather than parallel discovery. The golden ratio manifests in temple proportions from Egypt to Cambodia. Astronomical constants encode themselves into the dimensions of monuments built by societies that supposedly lacked advanced mathematical understanding. The precision of these relationships exceeds what Bronze Age cultures should have achieved through trial and error alone. Vatican scholars examining classical texts would have encountered repeated references to such mathematical principles, often attributed to divine revelation or instruction from semi-divine teachers. The consistency of these attributions across different cultural traditions suggests shared memory of actual historical sources rather than mythological invention. The teachers described in these accounts possessed knowledge that exceeded the apparent capabilities of the societies they instructed, implying survival from more sophisticated cultures whose main bodies had been destroyed by natural disasters. The linguistic archaeology preserved within Vatican manuscripts provides additional evidence for these lost knowledge traditions. Ancient languages contain technical vocabularies that appear fully formed in the earliest written records, suggesting inheritance from earlier linguistic systems. Terms for advanced metallurgy, astronomical observation, architectural engineering, and mathematical calculation show no developmental history within the languages that employed them. Instead, they appear as loan words borrowed from unknown sources, possibly representing fragments of global communication systems that facilitated knowledge transfer between distant scholarly institutions. The etymology of these technical terms often points toward hypothetical parent languages that left no other traces in the historical record. The vocabulary of sacred architecture, astronomical calculation, and advanced manufacturing techniques seems to derive from common sources that predate the civilizations usually credited with developing such knowledge. These phantom languages, known only through their contributions to later cultural traditions, suggest the existence of sophisticated educational networks that spanned continents and survived partial civilizational collapse. Church translators working with ancient texts regularly noted such linguistic anomalies, preserving their observations even when the implications remained unclear. Medieval scholars translating Greek and Arabic manuscripts encountered words and concepts that didn't fit conventional historical frameworks. Renaissance humanists studying newly recovered classical texts found references to technologies and social structures that seemed anachronistically advanced. These scholarly observations, carefully recorded and archived, created an inadvertent database of evidence for knowledge systems that mainstream archaeology has yet to acknowledge. The Vatican's global network of diplomatic and missionary contacts provided additional channels for collecting such anomalous information. Papal nuncios serving in distant lands forwarded reports of unusual archaeological discoveries that challenged conventional timelines. Jesuit scholars working in China, India, and the Americas documented indigenous traditions that claimed inheritance from ancient masters who possessed advanced understanding of natural phenomena. Dominican and Franciscan missionaries recorded oral histories that described sophisticated civilizations existing in the deep past before catastrophic events reshaped the world. These reports, filed according to the administrative logic of their time, preserve documentation of knowledge traditions that secular institutions might have dismissed as folklore. The Church's comprehensive approach to record-keeping meant that unusual observations received the same careful preservation as conventional historical documents. A missionary's account of mysterious ruins might rest alongside diplomatic correspondence. A scholar's notes about anomalous linguistic patterns could be preserved with theological treatises. The systematic nature of Vatican archiving ensured that such material survived even when their significance wasn't immediately recognized. Modern analytical techniques applied to these historical documents continue to reveal previously unnoticed patterns. Digital text analysis can identify recurring themes across thousands of separate manuscripts, highlighting connections that individual researchers might never detect. Machine translation algorithms help scholars working in one ancient language recognize parallels with materials written in scripts they cannot read personally. Pattern recognition software can trace the geographic and temporal distribution of similar concepts appearing in texts from different cultures and time periods. The convergence of these various lines of evidence creates a compelling case for reconsidering the antiquity and sophistication of human civilization. Archaeological discoveries continue to push the boundaries of known history further into the past. Linguistic analysis reveals knowledge vocabularies that imply much longer developmental periods than conventional chronologies allow. Historical documents preserve accounts of advanced cultures that supposedly couldn't have existed according to established timelines. The resistance to acknowledging these patterns reflects institutional inertia rather than lack of evidence. Academic specialization creates barriers between disciplines that might otherwise recognize connections between their respective findings. Archaeological discoveries are interpreted within frameworks that assume gradual technological development rather than inheritance from earlier sophisticated cultures. Linguistic anomalies are explained away rather than investigated as potential evidence for lost knowledge systems. Historical accounts of advanced ancient civilizations are dismissed as mythology rather than examined disciplinary scholarly as possible documentation of actual events. The Vatican's intertradition provides advantages for recognizing such cross-disciplinary connections. Church scholars have maintained expertise in classical languages while also engaging with modern scientific methods. Vatican astronomers conduct cutting-edge research while maintaining connections to historical observation traditions spanning centuries. Archaeological teams working under church auspices employ both traditional scholarship and advanced technological methods, creating opportunities for insights that might escape more narrowly focused investigations. The institutional continuity that characterizes Vatican scholarship also provides crucial perspective for evaluating claims about cyclical patterns in human civilization. The Church's experience as preserver of knowledge across political upheavals and social collapses offers models for understanding how information might survive civilizational disasters. Monastic communities maintained classical learning through periods when secular institutions failed, demonstrating the importance of dedicated knowledge-keeping organizations for cultural preservation. The theological framework governing Vatican research could accommodate evidence of ancient advanced civilizations more readily than secular academic institutions might expect. Catholic intellectual tradition emphasizes the compatibility of faith and reason, suggesting that human discovery of natural truths complements rather than contradicts religious understanding. The concept of natural law implies that human beings can discern principles governing the physical world through careful observation and logical analysis, regardless of their historical period or cultural context. This theological openness to natural discovery means that evidence of sophisticated ancient knowledge need not conflict with religious doctrine. If earlier civilizations developed advanced understanding of astronomy, mathematics, engineering, or medicine through empirical investigation, their achievements could be viewed as examples of human reason operating according to divine design. The preservation of such knowledge through catastrophic periods might even be interpreted as providential, ensuring that human wisdom accumulated across generations wouldn't be permanently lost. The practical implications of recovering ancient knowledge extend across multiple domains of contemporary concern. Environmental management techniques developed by cultures that maintain sustainable relationships with their ecosystems for millennia could inform modern approaches to climate adaptation and resource conservation. Agricultural methods that preserved soil fertility across centuries might offer alternatives to industrial farming practices that could provide models for sustainable development in deplete natural systems. Urban planning concepts that created stable communities era of rapid population growth. Medical traditions that evolved through thousands of years of empirical observation might complement modern pharmaceutical approaches with insights about human physiology and therapeutic intervention. Architectural principles that enable structures to survive seismic activity and extreme weather for millennia could inform contemporary building practices in regions subject to natural disasters. Mathematical and astronomical knowledge preserved in ancient sources might contribute to current scientific understanding in unexpected ways. The recovery of such practical wisdom requires not just access to ancient documents, but also the interpretive skills needed to recognize valuable information embedded within conventional historical sources. Vatican scholars, with their training in multiple ancient languages and familiarity with diverse cultural traditions, might be uniquely positioned to identify significant passages that specialists in narrower fields could overlook. The institution's long experience with preserving and interpreting complex historical materials provides essential expertise for evaluating ancient knowledge claims. The digitization initiatives currently transforming Vatican archival access create unprecedented opportunities for comprehensive analysis of the collection's contents. Documents that previously required physical visits to examine can now be studied by researchers worldwide, enabling collaborative investigations that span multiple institutions and disciplines. Advanced search algorithms can identify related passages across thousands of separate texts, revealing connections that would be impossible to detect through individual manuscript examination. Artificial intelligence applications trained on Vatican manuscript collections could recognize patterns in ancient technical vocabularies, astronomical references, and architectural descriptions that might escape human notice. Machine learning systems capable of processing multiple ancient languages simultaneously could trace the transmission of specific concepts across different cultural and linguistic traditions, potentially mapping the geographic and temporal distribution of inherited knowledge systems. The convergence of these technological capabilities with the Vatican's unparalleled manuscript holdings creates conditions favorable for revolutionary discoveries about humanity's past. If evidence of pre-Sumerian civilizations exists within the archives, modern analytical methods provide the tools needed to recognize and interpret such materials. The combination of historical documents, archaeological discoveries, and advanced analytical techniques might finally enable comprehensive reconstruction of humanity's deeper cultural heritage. The question of disclosure remains complex, involving considerations that extend beyond purely scholarly concerns. Evidence that fundamentally challenges established historical narratives could have profound implications for educational systems, cultural identities, and social institutions built around conventional understandings of human development. The Vatican's experience with managing sensitive historical information provides valuable perspective on how revolutionary discoveries might be responsibly integrated into public knowledge. The gradual approach that has characterized Vatican archival policy suggests a model for introducing potentially disruptive information in ways that allow for careful evaluation and social adaptation. Rather than dramatic revelations that could destabilize established institutions, controlled disclosure enables scholarly communities to assess new evidence thoroughly while preparing educational and cultural frameworks for necessary adjustments. Yet the potential benefits of recovered ancient knowledge might justify accelerating this cautious approach. If sophisticated cultures that existed before recorded history develop solutions to challenges that contemporary society faces, delaying access to such information could prove more costly than the disruption caused by revising historical timelines. The urgency of environmental, social, and technological problems confronting modern civilization might warrant accepting some degree of institutional uncertainty in exchange for access to potentially crucial wisdom from humanity's past. The balance between preservation and accessibility continues to evolve as Vatican leadership recognizes both the historical significance of their holdings and their responsibility to contribute to human understanding. Recent initiatives to expand researcher access while maintaining appropriate safeguards suggest institutional commitment to sharing knowledge while protecting irreplaceable documents from damage or misinterpretation. As we stand at the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern capability, the Vatican Archives represent far more than a repository of religious documents. They embody humanity's most systematic attempt to preserve knowledge across the cycles of achievement and loss that have characterized our species' journey through time. Within their climate-controlled chambers, among carefully cataloged manuscripts spanning centuries of human experience, may rest the documentation needed to complete our understanding of civilization's true antiquity and the extraordinary scope of human potential across the ages. The patient work of scholars continues, examining documents line by line, cross-referencing obscure passages with archaeological discoveries, applying new analytical techniques to ancient texts. Each fragment of evidence contributes to a gradually emerging picture that challenges conventional assumptions about human development and suggests possibilities that previous generations could hardly imagine. Whether through dramatic discovery or gradual accumulation of supporting evidence, the transformation of our understanding may ultimately reveal that the story of human civilization extends far deeper into the past than we have dared to believe, with implications that could reshape our conception of what it means to be human in a universe far older and more mysterious than our current knowledge. J.E. suggests the convergence of evidence from multiple sources creates a tapestry that grows more intricate with each thread of discovery. In the reading rooms of the Vatican Archives, where afternoon light filters through windows that have watched over centuries of scholarship, researchers encounter patterns that repeat across cultures and millennia with disturbing consistency. The same architectural principles appear in monuments separated by oceans and ages. The same astronomical alignments manifest in stone circles from Scotland to Cambodia. The same mathematical relationships encode themselves into temple foundations from Egypt to Peru. These parallels extend beyond mere coincidence into realms that challenge our fundamental understanding of how knowledge spreads through human societies. When cultures with no apparent contact develop identical solutions to complex engineering problems, conventional explanations begin to strain under the weight of accumulating evidence. The standard model of parallel evolution, independent discovery by separate societies, becomes increasingly inadequate when the details match with mathematical precision across vast distances and time periods. The implications become more profound when we examine the speed at which these sophisticated knowledge systems appear in the historical record. Advanced metallurgy emerges fully formed in multiple locations simultaneously. Complex astronomical calculations manifest without clear developmental histories. Monumental architecture appears with precision that modern engineers struggle to replicate, yet these achievements lack the gradual refinement process that typically characterizes technological development. This pattern suggests inheritance rather than invention, the application of existing knowledge to new circumstances rather than original discovery through experimentation. The builders of humanity's earliest monuments may have been reconstructing techniques learned from earlier masters, applying inherited wisdom to create structures that encoded and preserved crucial information for future generations. The cyclical nature of this preservation effort becomes apparent when we examine the recurring themes that appear in ancient texts from diverse cultures. Stories of great teachers who appeared after catastrophic events to instruct survivors in the arts of civilization repeat across mythological traditions worldwide. These accounts describe figures who possessed understanding that exceeded the apparent capabilities of the societies they taught, suggesting survival from more sophisticated cultures that had been largely destroyed by natural disasters. The consistency of these narratives across cultures that had no known contact indicates shared historical experience rather than mythological invention. The teachers described in these traditions brought specific technical knowledge about astronomy, mathematics, architecture, and agriculture. Their instruction enabled rapid reconstruction of complex societies from the remnants left by global catastrophes, explaining the sudden appearance of sophisticated civilizations in the archaeological record. Vatican manuscripts preserve numerous references to such instructional traditions, often embedded within theological discussions that viewed ancient wisdom as divine revelation transmitted through human intermediaries. Medieval scholars translating classical texts encountered repeated mentions of antediluvian knowledge preserved through catastrophic periods by dedicated custodians who maintained sacred libraries and teaching institutions. These accounts, while couched in religious language, may document actual historical processes by which advanced knowledge survived civilizational collapse. The geographic distribution of these preservation traditions suggests networks of institutions that spanned continents and maintained communication across political boundaries. References to sacred libraries appear in sources from Ireland to India, each claiming inheritance from earlier repositories that housed the accumulated wisdom of previous ages. The similarity of organizational structures described in these accounts implies common origins or systematic contact-keeping communities. Church between geographically separated knowledge scholars working with diverse manuscript traditions, would have been uniquely positioned to recognize such patterns of institutional continuity. Their familiarity with monastic preservation methods provided frameworks for understanding how knowledge could survive political upheavals and social collapses. The Vatican's own experience maintaining scholarly traditions across centuries of European turmoil offered practical models for evaluating claims about ancient knowledge preservation. The linguistic evidence embedded within these manuscript collections provides additional support for theories of inherited knowledge systems. Technical vocabularies that appear suddenly in ancient languages often show characteristics suggesting borrowing from earlier linguistic traditions. The terms lack developmental histories within their host languages, appearing instead as complete specialized systems imported from unknown sources. Analysis of these technical vocabularies reveals sophisticated understanding of concepts that supposedly weren't developed until much later periods. Ancient architectural terminology implies knowledge of engineering principles that weren't formally recognized until modern times. Early astronomical language incorporates precision that requires centuries of careful observation to achieve. Mathematical terms appear with definitions that suggest advanced understanding of geometric and algebraic relationships. The etymology of these specialized vocabularies often points toward hypothetical parent languages that left no direct textual evidence. Linguistic reconstruction techniques reveal common roots underlying technical terms used by cultures separated by vast distances and time periods. These phantom languages, known only through their contributions to later traditions, suggest the existence of global communication systems that facilitated knowledge transfer between distant scholarly communities. Vatican translators working with ancient texts regularly encountered such linguistic anomalies, documenting their observations even when the implications remained unclear. Medieval scholars noted unusual terms and concepts that didn't fit conventional historical frameworks, preserving their findings for future researchers who might possess better analytical tools. These accumulated observations, scattered across centuries of manuscript collections, form an inadvertent database of evidence for lost linguistic traditions. The technological implications of these linguistic patterns extend into practically every domain of ancient achievement. Metallurgical terms that appear fully formed in early texts suggest inherited understanding of complex chemical processes. Agricultural vocabularies imply sophisticated knowledge of soil management and crop cultivation techniques. Construction terminology indicates familiarity with engineering principles that enabled massive building projects without modern mechanical assistance. Medical vocabularies preserved in ancient sources reveal understanding of human physiology and therapeutic intervention that often exceeds contemporary knowledge in specific areas. Pharmacological terms demonstrate familiarity with plant chemistry and drug preparation methods that required extensive empirical testing to develop. Surgical terminology suggests procedural knowledge that implies advanced training institutions and systematic medical education. The preservation of such specialized knowledge through catastrophic periods would have required institutional structures capable of maintaining complex educational systems across generations of political instability. The most successful historical examples of such preservation occurred within religious communities that combined spiritual authority with scholarly expertise, creating organizational resilience that enabled survival through social upheavals that destroyed secular institutions. The Vatican's role as inheritor of these preservation traditions positions the institution uniquely for recognizing and interpreting evidence of ancient knowledge systems. Church scholars have maintained continuous engagement with classical learning while developing expertise in modern analytical methods, creating intellectual frameworks capable of bridging ancient wisdom and contemporary understanding. The theological context within which Vatican research operates provides advantages for evaluating claims about sophisticated pre-historical civilizations. Catholic intellectual tradition emphasizes the compatibility of natural discovery with religious faith, suggesting that human achievement in understanding the physical world reflects divine design rather than conflicting with spiritual truth. This framework allows for recognition of ancient accomplishments without requiring doctrinal revision. The concept of progressive revelation accommodates evidence that human understanding of natural phenomena developed gradually across extended time periods, rather than emerging suddenly in recent centuries. If ancient civilizations achieved sophisticated knowledge through careful observation and logical analysis, their discoveries could be viewed as examples of natural law operating according to divine intention across all historical periods. This theological openness to recognizing human achievement throughout history creates conditions favorable for acknowledging evidence of ancient advanced knowledge that secular academic institutions might resist due to challenges to established chronologies. The Church's experience adapting doctrine to accommodate scientific discoveries provides models for integrating new understanding about humanity's past without undermining essential spiritual teachings. The practical applications of recovered ancient knowledge could prove transformative for contemporary civilization facing unprecedented challenges. Environmental management techniques developed by cultures that maintain sustainable relationships with their ecosystems for millennia offer alternatives to industrial approaches that threaten long-term ecological stability. Agricultural methods that preserve soil fertility across centuries provide models for feeding growing populations without depleting natural resources. Urban planning concepts that created stable communities lasting for thousands of years could inform contemporary approaches to sustainable development in an era of rapid population growth and resource scarcity. Water management systems that functioned reliably across climatic variations might offer solutions for regions facing increasing drought and flood cycles due to changing weather patterns. Medical traditions that evolved through millennia of empirical observation preserve understanding of human health and therapeutic intervention that could complement modern pharmaceutical approaches. Traditional diagnostic methods often identify conditions that contemporary medicine struggles to recognize, while ancient therapeutic techniques frequently address root causes rather than merely treating symptoms. Architectural principles that enable structures to survive seismic activity and extreme weather for thousands of years provide insights for building in regions subject to natural disasters. Construction techniques that achieved remarkable durability without modern materials or mechanical assistance offer models for sustainable building practices that reduce environmental impact while maintaining structural integrity. The mathematical and astronomical knowledge preserved in ancient sources continues to yield insights that contribute to contemporary scientific understanding. Calculation methods developed through centuries of patient observation often reveal patterns and relationships that modern theoretical approaches have overlooked. Ancient astronomical records provide data spanning time periods that enable recognition of long-term cycles invisible to contemporary observation alone. The recovery and application of such ancient wisdom requires interdisciplinary collaboration between historians, archaeologists, linguists, engineers, and scientists willing to examine evidence without the constraints of conventional chronological assumptions. Vatican scholars, with their training in classical languages and familiarity with diverse cultural traditions, could play crucial roles in identifying and interpreting valuable information embedded within historical sources. The digitization initiatives transforming access to Vatican manuscript collections create unprecedented opportunities for comprehensive analysis using advanced computational methods. Machine learning algorithms capable of processing multiple ancient languages simultaneously could trace the transmission of technical concepts across different cultural traditions, mapping the geographic and temporal distribution of inherited knowledge systems. Pattern recognition software applied to digitized manuscript collections could identify recurring themes and terminology that individual researchers might never detect through traditional examination methods. Automated translation systems could help scholars recognize connections between texts written in languages they cannot read personally, enabling collaborative investigations that span multiple linguistic and cultural specializations. The convergence of these technological capabilities with the Vatican's unparalleled manuscript holdings creates conditions favorable for revolutionary discoveries about humanity's intellectual heritage. If comprehensive documentation of ancient advanced civilizations exists within the archives, modern analytical methods provide the tools needed to recognize and interpret such materials systematically rather than relying on chance encounters by individual researchers. The institutional framework governing Vatican research provides models for managing potentially disruptive discoveries responsibly. The Church's experience with sensitive historical materials demonstrates approaches for evaluating controversial evidence thoroughly while maintaining scholarly credibility and protecting fragile documents from damage or misinterpretation. The gradual disclosure policies that have characterized Vatican archival management suggest pathways for introducing revolutionary historical evidence in ways that allow for careful verification and social adaptation. Rather than dramatic revelations that could destabilize established institutions, controlled access enables scholarly communities to assess new information comprehensively while preparing educational and cultural frameworks for necessary adjustments. Yet the potential significance of ancient knowledge for addressing contemporary challenges might sophisticated cultures that existed before recorded history justify accelerating traditional disclosure timelines. If civilization faces restricting access to such information could prove moored solutions to problems that modern costly than the institutional disruption caused by revising historical narratives. The balance between preservation and accessibility continues to evolve as Vatican leadership recognizes both their responsibility as custodians of irreplaceable historical materials and their obligation to contribute to human understanding. Recent initiatives expanding researcher access while maintaining appropriate safeguards demonstrate institutional commitment to sharing knowledge while protecting documents that represent humanity's collective memory. The transformation of our understanding about civilization's antiquity may ultimately emerge not through single dramatic discoveries, but through the gradual accumulation of evidence that shifts scholarly consensus. Each linguistic anomaly documented in ancient texts, each archaeological discovery that challenges conventional timelines, each reanalysis of existing materials using improved techniques contributes to a growing recognition that human achievement extends far deeper into the past than previously imagined. The Vatican Archives, with their comprehensive scope and careful preservation across centuries of political upheaval, represent humanity's most systematic attempt to maintain institutional memory through the cycles of achievement and loss that have characterized our species' development. Within their climate-controlled chambers rest millions of documents that chronicle not only religious history, but the full spectrum of human experience across time and geography. Whether these collections contain explicit documentation of pre-Sumerian civilizations or subtle indications embedded within conventional historical sources, they constitute our most promising resource for recovering humanity's forgotten achievements. The patient work of scholars examining these materials line by line, applying new analytical techniques to ancient texts, and cross-referencing obscure passages with contemporary discoveries continues to yield insights that expand our understanding of human potential across the ages. As we approach the threshold of potentially transformative revelations about our species' past, the importance of institutions capable of preserving and interpreting complex historical evidence becomes increasingly apparent. The Vatican Archives embody more than mere document storage. They represent active engagement with humanity's intellectual heritage and commitment to understanding the full scope of human achievement across time. The intersection of ancient wisdom and modern analytical capability creates unprecedented opportunities for recovering knowledge that could inform contemporary approaches to the challenges facing human civilization. In reading rooms where scholars have pursued understanding for centuries, new generations of researchers apply cutting-edge methods to materials that have waited patiently for the tools needed to unlock their secrets. The story continues to unfold through careful scholarship and technological innovation, revealing patterns and connections that previous generations could barely imagine. Whether through gradual accumulation of supporting evidence or breakthrough discoveries that illuminate entire knowledge systems, the transformation of our understanding promises to reveal that human civilization encompasses achievements extending far beyond current recognition, with implications that could reshape our conception of what it means to be human in a universe more ancient and mysterious than conventional wisdom suggests. The weight of accumulated evidence presses against the boundaries of conventional understanding like water against a dam. In archives where silence holds court over centuries of human experience, patterns emerge that refuse to conform to neat historical categories. The deeper researchers venture into these preserved records, the more they encounter references that seem to pierce through accepted chronologies like arrows fired from an impossible distance. Consider the curious case of astronomical observations embedded within seemingly unrelated correspondence. A papal legate's routine diplomatic report from medieval Constantinople mentions in passing calculations that place stellar positions with precision that shouldn't have been achievable until centuries later. The mathematics underlying these observations require generational continuity of trained observers, yet they appear without explanation in the margins of political negotiations, as though such knowledge were so commonplace it merited no special attention. The same pattern repeats across different centuries and geographic regions. Trade agreements from Renaissance merchants working the Silk routes contain casual references to construction techniques that modern engineers struggle to comprehend. Missionary reports from the Americas describe indigenous mathematical systems that incorporate principles supposedly unknown to pre-Columbian cultures. These fragments surface not as the focus of their respective documents, but as background details so familiar to their authors that elaboration seemed unnecessary. The cumulative effect resembles archaeological stratigraphy in reverse. Instead of digging down through layers to reach older materials, scholars working through Vatican manuscripts encounter progressively older concepts, embedded within progressively newer texts. Ancient knowledge appears to flow upward through time like groundwater seeping into surface springs, emerging unexpectedly in documents whose primary purposes had nothing to do with preserving technical information. This upward flow of inherited understanding becomes most apparent in the vocabularies employed by medieval translators working with classical sources. Their Latin renditions of Greek and Arabic texts often employ terms that possess no clear etymology within the languages being translated. These mysterious words appear fully formed, carrying precise technical meanings that suggest extensive developmental histories despite lacking traceable origins. The linguistic archaeology preserved within these translations reveals conceptual frameworks that seem to derive from unknown parent traditions. Mathematical terminology that appears suddenly in medieval Latin incorporates distinctions and relationships that imply sophisticated theoretical understanding developed across generations of scholarly refinement. Yet the source traditions that presumably created these conceptual systems remain invisible to historical investigation. Similar patterns emerge in architectural vocabulary preserved within construction contracts and building specifications scattered throughout church archives. Technical terms describing engineering principles, structural relationships, and construction methods appear without developmental context, as though imported wholesale from earlier traditions that possessed advanced understanding of physical forces and material properties. The consistency of these linguistic anomalies across different manuscript traditions suggests systematic preservation of technical knowledge through institutional networks that maintained communication across political boundaries and cultural divisions. Specialized vocabularies don't emerge spontaneously. They develop through communities of practice that refine terminology through generations of applied experience. The Vatican's role as recipient of reports from across the Christian world created unique opportunities for recognizing such patterns of preserved knowledge. When similar technical terms appear in manuscripts from Ireland and Anatolia, from Spain and Syria, the likelihood of independent parallel development diminishes while evidence for common sources strengthens correspondingly. The preservation of these knowledge fragments becomes more remarkable when viewed against the historical backdrop of repeated civilizational disruptions that characterized the medieval period. Political upheavals, religious conflicts, plague outbreaks, and economic collapses regularly destroyed libraries and scattered scholarly communities. Yet technical vocabularies survived these catastrophes with surprising consistency, suggesting institutional structures capable of maintaining specialized knowledge through periods of social chaos. Monastic communities provided the most successful historical examples of such knowledge preservation, combining spiritual authority with scholarly expertise to create organizational resilience that enabled survival through upheavals that destroyed secular institutions. The techniques these communities developed for preserving classical learning through Europe's Dark Ages offer models for understanding how much older knowledge systems might have survived even more severe disruptions. The geographic distribution of preserved knowledge fragments reveals networks of communication that spanned continents and persisted across centuries of political instability. References to similar technical concepts appear in manuscripts from locations separated by thousands of miles and decades of time, indicating systematic contact between widely dispersed scholarly institutions. These communication networks become visible through the patterns of knowledge transmission documented in Vatican Archives. Certain technical innovations appear simultaneously in reports from different regions, spreading too rapidly for conventional explanation through trade routes or diplomatic contacts. The speed of transmission suggests pre-existing networks specifically designed for sharing specialized information between distant scholarly communities. The theological framework within which medieval scholars operated provided intellectual justification for preserving and transmitting such knowledge regardless of its apparent origins. The concept of natural law suggested that human discovery of physical principles reflected divine design operating through rational investigation. This perspective encouraged preservation of technical knowledge even when its sources remained unclear or controversial. Medieval scholars working within this framework approached ancient texts with assumptions that modern academics might find naive, but which proved remarkably effective for preservation purposes. Their willingness to accept claims about advanced ancient knowledge without demanding complete documentation enabled the survival of information that more skeptical approaches might have discarded as unreliable. The preservation methodology employed by medieval scriptoriums created multiple copies of important texts distributed across different locations, ensuring survival even when individual repositories faced destruction. This redundancy principle, applied systematically across centuries of manuscript production, created resilient information networks that maintained crucial knowledge through repeated catastrophes. The Vatican's emergence as central coordinator for these preservation networks reflected both practical necessity and institutional capability. The Church's diplomatic reach provided communication channels between distant scholarly communities, while its bureaucratic structures offered organizational frameworks for systematic knowledge management. The administrative records documenting these preservation efforts reveal sophisticated understanding of information management principles that wouldn't be formally recognized until much later periods. Cataloging systems, cross-referencing methods, and quality control procedures demonstrate institutional commitment to maintaining comprehensive knowledge archives across extended time periods. These archival techniques enabled Vatican scholars to recognize patterns and connections that might escape notice in smaller collections. When similar concepts appear in manuscripts from different centuries and cultures, the likelihood of identifying relationships increases dramatically within comprehensive archives that facilitate systematic comparison. The digitization initiatives currently transforming access to Vatican manuscript collections create unprecedented opportunities for applying pattern recognition algorithms to identify such relationships automatically. Machine learning systems trained on historical texts can detect recurring themes and terminology across thousands of documents, revealing connections that human researchers might never recognize through individual examination. Computational analysis of linguistic patterns within digitized manuscripts could map the geographic and temporal distribution of technical vocabularies with precision impossible through traditional methods. Such mapping might reveal the operational structures of ancient knowledge networks, identifying hub locations and communication pathways that maintain scholarly contact across vast distances. The convergence of historical preservation and modern analytical capability creates conditions favorable for comprehensive reconstruction of humanity's intellectual heritage. If systematic documentation of advanced ancient knowledge exists within Vatican Archives, contemporary tools provide the means for recognizing and interpreting such evidence systematically, rather than relying on chance discoveries by individual researchers. The institutional framework governing Vatican research offers models for managing potentially revolutionary discoveries responsibly. The Church's experience with sensitive historical materials demonstrates approaches for evaluating controversial evidence while maintaining scholarly credibility and protecting irreplaceable documents from damage or misinterpretation. The transformation of historical understanding often proceeds through accumulation of supporting evidence rather than single dramatic revelations. Each linguistic anomaly documented in ancient texts, each cross-cultural parallel identified in manuscript collections, each technological reference that challenges conventional timelines contributes to gradually shifting scholarly consensus about human achievement across time. The Vatican Archives represent more than documentary repositories. They embody active engagement with humanity's collective memory and commitment to understanding the full scope of human potential across historical periods. Within their climate-controlled chambers, carefully preserved materials await analytical techniques capable of unlocking secrets that have remained hidden within familiar sources for centuries. The patient work of scholarship continues, examining documents with fresh perspectives informed by expanding archaeological knowledge and improved analytical methods. Each manuscript studied, each pattern recognized, each connection established between seemingly disparate sources adds another piece to an emerging picture that suggests human intellectual achievement extends far deeper into the past than conventional wisdom acknowledges. As researchers apply increasingly sophisticated methods to these ancient collections, the boundaries between historical periods begin to blur in ways that challenge fundamental assumptions about human development. The evidence points toward continuities of knowledge that span supposed dark ages and cultural breaks, revealing underlying streams of preserved understanding that flow beneath the surface events chronicled in conventional histories. The implications extend beyond academic curiosity into realms of practical application for contemporary challenges. If advanced knowledge systems survived from earlier periods through institutional preservation networks, their recovery could provide insights relevant to modern problems in fields ranging from environmental management to social organization. The intersection of ancient wisdom and modern analytical capability promises discoveries that could transform our understanding of human potential and the cyclical nature of civilization itself. In reading rooms where scholars have pursued knowledge for generations, new tools applied to old texts continue revealing patterns that suggest the story of human achievement encompasses far more than current timelines encompass, with implications that reach into the deepest questions about who we are and what we might become when we fully grasp the extraordinary scope of our species' intellectual heritage across the vast expanse of time. The convergence of evidence reaches a crescendo in the vaulted chambers where dust motes dance through shafts of filtered light, and the accumulated weight of centuries presses against the boundaries of accepted knowledge. Here, in these final moments of investigation, we encounter not conclusions, but doorways, not answers, but invitations to peer deeper into the labyrinth of human memory. The researchers who have spent their lives parsing these ancient documents describe a peculiar sensation that emerges after months of immersion in the materials. The fragmentary references begin to coalesce into something larger than their individual components. A missionary's casual mention of astronomical alignments connects with a diplomat's description of construction techniques. A translator's puzzlement over technical vocabulary resonates with an explorer's account of indigenous traditions that seemed impossibly sophisticated for their supposed historical context. These connections don't announce themselves with fanfare. They whisper through the margins of unrelated texts, surface in the footnotes of theological debates, emerge from the commercial records of long-forgotten trade agreements. The pattern builds slowly, like sediment accumulating grain by grain until the weight becomes undeniable. What emerges is not a single lost civilization, but something far more complex and far-reaching. The evidence points toward knowledge systems that transcended individual cultures, linguistic traditions that crossed oceanic boundaries, technical capabilities that survive catastrophic disruptions through institutional networks designed specifically for preservation across dark ages. The Vatican Archives, in this context, represent more than a repository of Christian history. They constitute humanity's most systematic attempt to maintain continuity of memory through the cycles of rise and collapse that have shaped our species' journey across time. The documents preserved within these climate-controlled chambers chronicle not just the official narrative of Western civilization, but the underground streams of knowledge that flowed beneath political upheavals and cultural transformations. Each manuscript examined reveals another thread in this vast tapestry of inherited understanding. The technical vocabularies that appear without explanation in medieval texts. The mathematical concepts that surface in contexts where they shouldn't exist according to conventional chronologies. The architectural principles embedded in construction contracts that describe capabilities far exceeding what Bronze Age societies should have possessed. The implications extend beyond historical curiosity into realms that could reshape our understanding of human potential itself. If sophisticated knowledge systems did survive from earlier epochs through networks of dedicated preservationists, then the rapid technological development of recent centuries might represent not unprecedented innovation, but rediscovery of capabilities that humanity possessed in deeper antiquity. The challenge now lies not in gathering more evidence, but in developing frameworks capable of integrating what has already been discovered. The fragmented references scattered throughout Vatican manuscripts require synthesis approaches that can bridge linguistic, cultural, and temporal boundaries to reveal the larger patterns they collectively describe. Modern analytical methods provide unprecedented tools for such synthesis. Digital humanities approaches can map relationships between documents that individual scholars working with physical materials might never recognize. Pattern recognition algorithms can identify recurring themes across manuscript collections that span centuries and continents. Machine translation systems enable recognition of connections between texts written in languages that few contemporary researchers can read fluently. The silence in these reading rooms carries more than the weight of centuries. It holds the whispered promise that human achievement extends far deeper into the shadows of time than we have dared imagine. Whether the Vatican archives contain explicit proof of pre-Sumerian civilizations or preserve only fragments embedded within familiar sources, they represent our most promising gateway to understanding the extraordinary scope of human potential across the ages. The patient work continues, each document examined bringing us closer to grasping the full tapestry of our species' forgotten legacy, waiting to be rediscovered and reclaimed.